The lights inside the congressional hearing room shone brightly on Karoline Leavitt as she stepped forward to the podium. Her cream-colored blazer looked sharp against the dark wooden backdrop, and though her hands gripped the edges firmly, her face showed only calm determination. A few minutes earlier, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had walked in through a side entrance with her legal team trailing close behind. Their faces were hard, serious, and unreadable. Everyone in the room could feel the tension pressing down like a heavy weight. For weeks, this $80 million defamation lawsuit had been splashed across every major headline. What began as a fiery argument on national television had grown into a legal war that now threatened to destroy Leavitt's entire career. "I came here today to face this issue directly," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves racing through her body. She looked straight at Crockett, whose expression did not shift even a little. Her silence was sharper than words. What came next stunned every single person seated there. It would later be described as the moment that might permanently alter how political battles were fought in America. But before unfolding the rest of this dramatic face-off, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep analysis and breaking stories. This confrontation between Leavitt and Crockett revealed how quickly the political climate of the country was shifting, and why things would never return to the way they once were. Karoline Leavitt was only 28, yet her rise had been faster than almost anyone in recent Republican history. She had gone from working in Trump's White House press office to being named the youngest GOP spokesperson ever. Her sharp answers, quick humor, and total loyalty to conservative causes had made her a star on the right. But 3 months ago, during a heated segment on Fox News about government spending, she made a remark about Congresswoman Crockett that would completely turn her world upside down. Leavitt had declared on air that Congresswoman Crockett had diverted funds intended for infrastructure projects in her district and used them for personal deals that helped her donors. "The evidence is there for anyone willing to check," she had said confidently. The claim spread like wildfire. Conservative outlets picked it up instantly and repeated it across the country. What Leavitt never expected was Crockett's shocking counterattack. Instead of dismissing the charge with a press release or an angry tweet, Crockett came out swinging with a massive $8 million defamation lawsuit filed in federal court. Jasmine Crockett, at 43, had built her name as a bold progressive leader out of Texas. Before entering politics, she was a civil rights lawyer with a reputation for being methodical, fearless, and razor-sharp. She was not someone who fought with quick sound bites or empty drama. She believed in carefully prepared arguments and precise actions. While most politicians would have brushed off Leavitt's accusation as just another insult in the endless a cycle of political attacks, Crockett decided to make this one count. "I didn't get my law degree just to let people lie about me on national television," she told reporters outside the courthouse. "It's time to bring back consequences into politics." Her words struck a chord, not just with her supporters, but with observers across the country. The risk for Leavitt could not have been more severe. If she lost, the judgment would bankrupt her completely. $80 million was a number she could never pay, and her reputation would be shattered. But beyond her own future, analysts warned that the case could ripple through all of political media. Every spokesperson, commentator, or politician who appeared on air would have to think twice before throwing accusations at their opponents. This was not just about Leavitt. It was about whether American politics would keep tolerating unchecked attacks or whether new boundaries were about to be drawn. That afternoon, the two women came face to face in a congressional meeting room, not a courtroom, but a last chance. Negotiation sessions set up before the lawsuit proceeded further. Leavitt herself had requested the meeting, hoping desperately to avoid trial. The tension inside was unlike anything the mediators had seen before. Both sides sat at a long oak table polished to a shine. Leavitt's lawyer, Richard H., a well-known Washington attorney, opened the session. "We are here in good faith," he said calmly. "My client has prepared a statement she wishes to deliver directly." Crockett sat back in her chair, arms crossed, her navy suit as sharp as her gaze. Her lead counsel, Marissa Washington, one of the country's top defamation lawyers with a record of winning landmark cases, leaned forward. "We will listen," Washington said firmly. "But understand this. We are not here for empty performances. You're here for real solutions. Leavitt rose slowly to her feet. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed her papers on the table. Congresswoman Crockett, she began, her voice quiet but controlled. I asked for this meeting because I believe what happened between us started as a misunderstanding that has spiraled out of control. The statement I made was based on reports. Crockett cut her off instantly. Her voice was calm but cold enough to chill the air. You went on national television and accused me of corruption and stealing from my constituents. There was no misunderstanding about that. The entire room seemed to tighten with her words. Leavitt swallowed hard. If I may continue, she said, trying to keep her composure. The reports I cited have since been called into question, and I acknowledge that. Crockett leaned forward. They weren't questioned. They were debunked. 3 independent fact-checkers and even the Congressional Ethics Committee proved your claims false. You didn't say reports indicate, you stated it as fact. One of the mediators, Congressman James Wilson, raised his hand. Please, let's allow Ms. Leavitt to finish. Leavitt nodded gratefully and pressed on. As I was saying, I now recognize that my statement was incorrect. I am willing to issue a full retraction and apology on the same network where the original remarks were made. For a brief second, it felt like the atmosphere might ease. But then Crockett's attorney slid a document across the table. A retraction alone is not enough, Washington said firmly. Our terms are as follows. A full apology broadcast on Fox News, CNN, and MSNBC during primetime hours. A written apology printed in the Washington Post, the New York Times, and your local hometown paper. A financial settlement of $5 million, which will go directly to infrastructure projects in Congresswoman Crockett's district. And finally, a legally binding promise that you will never again comment on her handling of district funds. The room froze in silence. Leavitt's lawyer nearly lost his composure. $5 million? He exclaimed. That is completely unreasonable for what was a single mistaken statement. Crockett's voice cut through the air like a blade. Mistaken? You knew what you were doing. That was no accident. That was a deliberate attack meant to ruin me. Leavitt's team huddled quickly, whispering strategies. After a few tense minutes, Leavitt herself stood up and walked closer to Crockett. Her voice softened as the political edge dropped away. Congresswoman, please, she said sincerely. I understand why you are angry. You have every right to be. But $5 million would destroy me financially. I'm asking you, as one person to another, to reconsider. For the first time that day, her words seemed to carry a raw honesty. Crockett studied her face for a long moment, unreadable as ever. The entire room held its breath. Finally, Crockett spoke, her tone like iron. You should have thought about consequences before you opened your mouth. Words have costs, Ms. Leavitt, sometimes very high ones. The silence that followed was suffocating, porters waiting outside. The chamber refreshed their phones over and over, hungry for the smallest update. Inside, Leavitt clenched her jaw, refusing to break eye contact with Crockett. The moment was almost unbearable. Finally, Leavitt's lawyer cleared his throat. Congresswoman, your terms are unrealistic, he said firmly. My client is willing to apologize publicly, but this is not a criminal trial. It was a political statement, nothing more. Crockett's attorney leaned back in her chair and gave a faint smile that held no warmth. That nothing more nearly destroyed my client's credibility in front of millions. Your words had impact. You don't get to hide behind politics. When you aim to ruin someone's career, the mediator intervened again, his voice tight. Perhaps we can focus on a middle ground. But Crockett wasn't interested in compromise, at least not yet. She had seen too many people walk away without accountability. This time, she wanted to make an example. She wanted the country to understand that reckless words carried weight. The room remained tense, both sides unwilling to back down. As the negotiation dragged on, the news cycle outside erupted. CNN ran a live panel discussing the Leavitt-Crockett showdown. While Fox News defended Leavitt as a victim of cancel culture, Twitter blazed with hashtags, each side of the political spectrum using the battle to fuel their own arguments. Two supporters on the left, Crockett was a hero standing against lies. Two conservatives, Leavitt was a young fighter being crushed by an establishment terrified of her rise. Within hours, the hearing had transformed from a legal matter into a cultural war pulling millions into its orbit. Meanwhile, inside the room, Leavitt tried once more to appeal directly to Crockett. "Jasmine," she said, deliberately choosing not to use her title this time. "We can keep fighting this in public, dragging each other through the mud for months, or we can end this now with dignity. An apology, even a strong one, is something I am willing to do. But $5 million? That's a political execution, not justice." For a second, Crockett's mask cracked just slightly, her lips tightening in thought. She wasn't blind to the optics. If she pushed too far, she risked looking vindictive instead of principled. Her lawyer leaned toward her, whispering something only she could hear. Crockett listened, then leaned back and spoke carefully. $3 million, she said flatly. Non-negotiable. Half of it goes to public housing in my district, the rest to legal fees. And the public apology across all networks remains. That is my final offer. Leavitt blinked, stunned. The number was lower, but still crushing. Her attorney shook his head. "Still impossible," he whispered. But Leavitt, knowing the cameras outside were waiting for an answer, forced herself to respond. "I need time," she said finally, her voice breaking slightly. "I can't agree to that right now." The mediator nodded, signaling for a pause. Both parties stepped out into separate conference rooms. The hallway filled with murmurs as staffers, journalists, and aides speculated on what was happening. Inside, for the first time, Leavitt allowed herself to feel the weight of it all. She sat down, closed her eyes, and whispered to herself, "How did I let it get this far?" Her lawyer placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're young," he said quietly, "and they see you as a threat. That's why they're coming down so hard. But if we don't find a way to settle, this trial will eat you alive." Leavitt nodded. Though her mind was far away, she thought back to the early days in Washington, when she believed politics was about ideas and passion, not destruction. Now it felt like survival of the cruelest. On the other side of the building, Crockett sat in silence while her team strategized. Though she appeared calm, her thoughts churned beneath the surface. She knew Leavitt's downfall could serve as a warning. But she also remembered her own early days as a lawyer, when she had fought for justice against corporations that thought they were untouchable. In Leavitt, she almost saw a reflection of herself, ambitious, bold, maybe reckless, but unafraid. That recognition tugged at her, though she didn't show it. Her attorney leaned in. "She's close to breaking. Hold firm." Crockett gave a small nod. When the meeting reconvened, the air felt heavier than before. Steadying herself. With both hands on the table, "Congresswoman," she began, her voice softer now, "I will issue a televised apology. I will retract every word and admit I was wrong. I will do it on every network you request. I cannot pay $3 million. If that is your final demand, then we will see each other in court." The words shocked even her own legal team. But Leavitt knew she couldn't bend any further without losing everything. Crockett studied her, eyes narrowed. For a moment she looked ready to respond, but then she simply gathered her papers and stood. "So be it," she said. The words landed like a gavel striking. "Okay?" Reporters outside surged forward as the doors opened, shouting questions. Both women emerged without speaking, their faces carved from stone. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward, but not a word was spoken. The silence said everything this war was far from over. That night, every major news outlet replayed the footage. Headlines screamed about the clash of the titans and the $80 million gamble. Commentators dissected every gesture, every word, trying to predict the outcome. On social media, the divide grew sharper. Hashtags like #StandWithCrockett and #FightForLeavitt trended simultaneously. Each side convinced of their champion's righteousness. And in the middle of it all, one truth became impossible to ignore. This was no longer just a legal case. It was a symbol of the new battlefield of American politics, where words could cost millions and reputations were weapons sharper than knives. Both women knew it. and the country braced itself for what came next. By the following week, Washington was boiling with speculation. The case hadn't even entered trial yet, but it was already dominating every political conversation across the country. Talk shows debated endlessly whether Karoline Leavitt should settle, while newspapers published OPDs questioning whether Crockett's lawsuit was a bold act of accountability or a dangerous weaponization of the courts. Polls showed voters were split almost perfectly down the middle. Conservatives rallied around Leavitt, praising her as a young voice being unfairly silenced. Progressives hailed Crockett as a defender of truth who was tired of watching lies destroy reputations. Inside her small apartment, Leavitt sat alone, staring at her phone. She had always thrived under the pressure of media storms, but this time was different. This wasn't just about winning an argument on television. This was about her entire future. Her parents called daily, begging her to walk away from politics, if that's what it took to save herself. But walking away wasn't in her nature. She had built her career on being fearless, and giving up now would feel like betrayal. Still, as she looked at the growing pile of legal documents on her kitchen table, she couldn't shake the thought, what if they're right? What if I really can't survive this? Meanwhile, Crockett was preparing just as intensely. Her legal team built an airtight case, collecting fact-check reports, statements from the ethics committee, and hours of video footage proving the damage caused by Leavitt's accusation. They framed the case not only as a personal defense, but as a cultural reckoning. If we win, Crockett told her staff, we're setting a new standard. Lies won't be free anymore. They'll come with a price tag. Her words fueled her supporters, but privately, she wrestled with the consequences. A victory this large would destroy Leavitt's career forever. Crockett wasn't sure how she felt about that. She wanted accountability, not blood. Yet once the wheels of justice began turning, even she couldn't stop them. The first pretrial hearing was a media circus. Cameras lined the courthouse steps. Helicopters hovered overhead, and reporters broadcast live updates every few minutes. Leavitt walked in, flanked by her attorneys, her face pale but composed. Crockett entered later, steady and focused, her navy blue suit crisp against the gray courthouse walls. The moment the two women appeared within the same frame, the crowd erupted into shouts of support and jeers of anger. Signs reading "Truth Matters" clashed against banners declaring "Stop the Witch Hunt." The courthouse itself seemed to tremble under the weight of divided America inside the courtroom. The judge made it clear that the case would be treated with the utmost seriousness. "This is not about politics," he declared firmly. "This is about whether false statements, when broadcast to millions, carry consequences under the law." His words echoed through the chamber, silencing even the most restless spectators. Leavitt sat stiffly at her table, her hands clenched tight in her lap. Crockett, by contrast, looked almost serene, though years of legal training had prepared her for this very moment. The first argument set the tone. Crockett's attorney presented a blistering account of how Leavitt's televised statement had spread like wildfire. Clips of news anchors repeating the claim played on a large screen, followed by evidence of social media posts and angry phone calls to Crockett's office. "This wasn't a mistake," Washington thundered. "This was a calculated strike, and it nearly destroyed my client's career." Leavitt's attorney countered with equal passion, framing the statement as political speech protected by the First Amendment. "My client was doing what politicians and spokespeople do every single day, challenging the record of an elected official. To punish her for that would be to punish free speech itself." The clash electrified the courtroom. Spectators leaned forward in their seats. Journalists scribbled notes furiously. The judge occasionally had to bang his gavel to restore order. At one point, when Washington pressed the idea that Leavitt had acted with malice, Leavitt herself rose suddenly, unable to hold back. "I never lied," she burst out. "I believed the reports I read. I believed I was telling the truth." The judge sternly reminded her to sit down. But the outburst had already sent ripples through the room. Outside, the moment went viral instantly. Clips of Leavitt's emotional declaration flooded Twitter and TikTok. Supporters praised her courage, while critics mocked her as desperate. In living rooms across the country, families argued about who was right. The trial had become more than a case. It was a reflection of America's own divided soul. That night, as Leavitt prepared for the next day in court, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Meet me tomorrow. Off the record. Midnight, corner of 4th and Main. Come alone." She stared at the screen, heart racing. It was reckless, maybe even dangerous, but something inside told her this was important. She slipped the phone into her bag and tried to steady her breathing. Meanwhile, across town, Crockett sat in her office staring at a framed photo of her law school graduation. She remembered the fire she had felt back then, the determination to fight injustice wherever she found it. Now, staring down one of the most high-profile cases of her career, she wondered if she was still the same person. The stakes were higher, the spotlight harsher, and the cost greater than ever. She closed her eyes, exhaled slowly, and whispered to herself, "Don't lose sight of why you started." The city of Washington hardly slept that night. Commentators filled the airwaves, protesters camped outside the courthouse, and both women lay awake in their separate corners of the storm. The battle was just beginning, and no one, not the media, not the public, not even Leavitt or Crockett themselves, could predict how it would end. At midnight, the streets of Washington were nearly empty, the kind of silence that carried its own weight. Karoline Leavitt pulled her hood tight as she approached the shadowy corner of 4th and Main. Her heart hammered in her chest. A figure stepped out from the darkness, an older man in a gray coat, his face hidden by the brim of a hat. "You don't know me," he said quietly, "but I know what's really going on here." Leavitt froze, ready to run, but something in his tone held her in place. "That lawsuit isn't just about you and Crockett," he continued. "There are bigger hands pushing this fight. If you don't play it right, you won't just lose your career, you might end up destroyed." He slipped a small envelope into her hand and walked away without another word. Back in her apartment, Leavitt ripped it open. Inside were photocopies of internal memos, emails, and documents linking Crockett's legal team to a powerful network of political donors. Her pulse quickened. If these were real, it meant the lawsuit wasn't simply about truth. It was a coordinated strike to crush her before she could rise any higher in Republican politics. For the first time since the ordeal began, Leavitt felt less like a victim and more like a soldier in the middle of a war much larger than herself. The next morning in court, Leavitt's lawyer surprised everyone by introducing a motion for discovery that hinted at external influences on the lawsuit. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Crockett's attorney immediately objected, but the judge allowed limited review, stating, "If political interference is at play, this court deserves to know." Suddenly, the ground beneath Crockett seemed less stable. Her composure didn't break, but her mind raced. She had never intended for outside forces to shape her fight, but had they? The media exploded again. Headlines shifted from Leavitt faces ruin to "Is Crockett's case politically weaponized?" The public, already divided, now found new fuel for their arguments. Protesters outside the courthouse doubled in number, some demanding justice, others shouting about corruption in the system itself. The trial was no longer just about two women. It had become a national reckoning over truth, power, and the price of ambition. During recess, Leavitt sat quietly in the corner, scrolling through reactions on her phone. Thousands of messages flooded in, some hateful, some supportive, and a surprising number from moderates who admitted they were beginning to doubt the lawsuit's purity. For the first time, she felt the tide turning. Her lawyer leaned close and whispered, "If we press this, we can force them into a settlement. They don't want those documents exposed." Leavitt nodded, though part of her hesitated. She hadn't come into politics to play games with secrets, but the fight had changed her. Maybe survival required becoming exactly what she once swore she'd never be. Crockett, meanwhile, faced her own crisis. In a private meeting with her team, she slammed a stack of papers onto the table. "I told you this case was about truth," she snapped. "Not politics. If anyone out there thinks I'm being used, it undermines everything." Her attorney tried to calm her. "The donors don't change the facts." Leavitt's statement was still false, but Crockett shook her head. "Facts don't matter if the public stops believing me." For the first time, doubt flickered across her face. The final day of pre-trial hearings arrived, and the atmosphere inside the courtroom was electric. Both sides knew the stakes had shifted. When Leavitt's lawyer hinted once again at external interference, Crockett finally broke her silence. Rising from her seat, she addressed the judge directly. "Your Honor, this case is not about donors or politics or influence. This case is about my name, about whether it can be dragged through the mud without consequence. I don't care who stands behind me or who stands against me. I'm here to defend myself." Her words rang with raw emotion, and for a moment, even her critics had to respect her resolve. Leavitt stood too, unable to remain seated. "And I am here to defend the right to speak freely," she said, her voice carrying across the chamber. "Yes, I made a mistake. Yes, I repeated something I should have verified. But if every error becomes an $80 million weapon, then none of us are safe, not Democrats, not Republicans, not anyone who dares to speak in public. This isn't just my fight. This is about the future of political speech in America." The judge banged his gavel for order, but the impact of those two speeches was already sealed. Outside the courthouse, crowds roared as the clips went viral. Analysts on every network declared that the case had moved beyond law and into the realm of history. Whatever came next, it would shape the future of politics in ways no one could yet predict. As the sun set over Washington, both women left the courthouse through different exits, surrounded by flashing cameras and shouting supporters. They didn't speak, but each carried the same weight in their hearts. This battle was bigger than them now. It was no longer about Karoline Leavitt versus Jasmine Crockett. It was about a nation caught between free speech and accountability, truth and power, ambition and survival. And as America braced for the coming trial, one thing was certain: the verdict, whenever it came, would change everything. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next chapter in this extraordinary clash, because the storm has only just begun.